All right, and then if people jump in or show up at the door.
Okay. All right.
Would you like an introduction?
No, that's okay. We'll keep it informal. Hello, I'm Jenna Spinelle. I work in the McCourtney Institute for Democracy and teach in the Bellisario College, a class that I'll be talking about at the end of the presentation. But my work, broadly speaking, focuses on creators. So I have a degree in journalism. My first job was at a newspaper. I've done a lot of things since then, but I've seen a disconnect between the way that universities prepare students for the work world in terms of career paths and trajectories, and all these people that I was spending time with as a podcaster, other podcasters, newsletter writers, YouTubers, bloggers, social media creators. And so I have been trying to marry those worlds, how we can bring the best of the education that we provide here at Penn State, both in communications, in the arts, in the liberal arts and humanities. How do we marry that with this creator world that's happening? And so I'm going to give you a bit of a taste of that today, including some of what I cover in my class on independent content creation. So we'll talk through audience development, monetization, look at some examples, and then have lots of time for questions, hopefully. And if you have any, since we are a small group, just shout them out. If you have them, those watching on Zoom, Stephanie, if you can help me keep an eye on those, that'd be great. So when we think about the creator economy, that's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot. People might have slightly different interpretations of it. I think about it as a way to combine something that you're passionate about with an opportunity to create a business or make money or find some level of financial success. As I said, rather than going out and getting a job for someone else, you are the creator. You are your own boss. You are the editor. You are the producer. You are the promoter, which is not all rosy. I want to be careful. I think sometimes in discussions in these spaces, the idea of hustle culture is overly glorified without thinking about things like burnout and mental health and ways that this creator world is in some ways manifestations of existing power structures and hierarchies that we've had in our society forever. So I don't want to, overly glorify it here, but I do think that on the other hand, the other side of that spectrum, the creator economy provides opportunities for people who were typically left out of the gatekeeping role in media and the arts, and everybody can kind of chart their own path. So that's what I focus on. So the old way of doing things, you got a job creating something for an outlet or a brand, or you were in some way employed by someone else. And now, as I said, there's this whole new world that's opened up for individuals, even students. There are several folks already here at Penn State who are doing this to be able to create their own content and receive financial support for doing so.
Your slides aren't showing. Can you reshare your desktop?
Oh, sure.
And Zoom. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
So also inherent in the sort of old way of doing things, you need to have a large audience. So if you were a media outlet, a newspaper, magazine, TV station, you are always chasing clicks or shares or downloads or views or ratings or all of those things with that big, getting those advertising dollars. But now if you are a podcaster or on Substack or creating your own blog or newsletter, you can find a very small niche audience to support what you do. I have a friend who runs a podcast called Know Your Enemy. They cover politics. They make, my friend and his co-host, they make about $20,000 a month from people on Patreon who support their work. And there are people who would pay them more, but Patreon sort of makes you limit these tiers of what people can pay or not. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's just to say that there are people out there who are making a living this way, either as their full-time income or something that they do on the side, like a passion project, so to speak. And that's something I help my students navigate through as well. Like, how do you decide if you want to do this full-time, or is there a way to, let's say you do want to go have a career in sports journalism, for example, but you have this other thing that you're really interested in. How do you find time and space to do the other thing, right? And what are the best ways to do that? So thinking about the scale of this, there are about 200,000 creators on Patreon. So Patreon's a platform where anybody can support a creative or artistic endeavor. Substack has 500,000 paid subscribers. Substack is an email newsletter platform and growing more and more by the day. And there are more than 100 million podcast listeners. So that's a lot. And so there's a lot of potential audience out there, but that is still only a third of the US population. Math is not my strong suit. So I always tell people when it comes to podcasting, what can all of us do to bring new people to the medium? I have done presentations at schools, at senior centers. That audience loves podcasts. Once they get past like the technical piece of it, there is no better feeling than having a line of people waiting to come up to you and hand you their phone or their tablet or their computer and say, subscribe me, So always be thinking about what untapped audience is out there for what you're doing, because the internet is nearly infinite. There are so many niche communities out there. I don't need to tell you this. I don't think you seem like you already have a good understanding of it. But if you have something you're into, there are other people out there who are into it too. And the internet brings us all together. I think the internet gets a bad rap sometimes, deservedly so, but there are ways that it can bring people together in a positive way. So let's just run through, I mentioned some of these briefly, but some of these platforms and ways that people have to get their content out to the world, their ideas out to the world. So newsletters are a growing thing. This is actually an interesting point of discussion in my class this semester. My students are like, why would anybody ever want to voluntarily read an email? And I'm like, well, your relationship to email may change once you start working, but that's something to think about too. I think newsletters are very big right now with, I would say, millennials and older, but maybe Gen Z, not so much. So I'm learning from my students that way. But they are taking off in the media world, in people doing all kinds of things in politics. Lots of professors are finding success on Substack. If you follow Heather Cox Richardson, is a historian. She has a newsletter called Notes from an American that has tens of thousands, if not more, subscribers. She's just a history professor, and now she's expanded into podcasting and all sorts of things as well. Review is another big newsletter platform that's integrated with Twitter. But these platforms all take a cut. On the one hand, they make it very easy to, write your content, put it out there, manage your subscribers. You don't have to do a lot of the administrative work, but they take a fee as a result. And newsletters also present opportunities for sponsorship and advertising. So I had a student, Sydney, last semester, who was very interested in the arts world and painting in particular. And so she and I talked a lot about different art supply companies who might be interested in sponsoring her. She grew a large enough following. One of the women I had speak in my class in last fall, her name is Kinsey Grant. She runs a newsletter and a podcast called Thinking is Cool. And she has a background in finance. She used to work at a business news site called Morning Brew. So she went after financial services companies who wanted to target a Gen Z audience about starting to save for retirement and these sorts of things. But she knew that she could deliver this audience that she had built of largely young, people in their mid to late 20s, which is who this company wanted to reach. And so she went after them and she charged them top dollar and they paid it. And so I think there's a lot of these deals and opportunities that are kind of ripe for the taking out there right now. We're all familiar with podcasts. As you all know, there is no one central distribution platform like Substack or something for email. And monetization does not come directly from the podcast platforms themselves, whereas I should have mentioned with the newsletter platforms, your email subscribers pay you directly. So you pay $5 a month to get Heather Cox Richardson's newsletter, for example. I subscribe to one called Culture Study by Anne Helen Peterson, who is a former writer for BuzzFeed, also has a PhD in sociology or cultural studies, something along those lines, but she gives like sort of academic takes on pop culture is maybe the best way I would describe it. But she also has thousands of subscribers who pay her $5 or $10 a month for what she puts out. Not the case in podcasting. Podcasters have to generally go through Patreon. Supporting Cast is another monetization platform in podcasts. Or again, we've all heard ads on podcasts. That's another way to make money there as well. And then there are things like Patreon, which can monetize any creative endeavor. People choose how much they want to pay. You could set up various tiers and you offer them bonus content or increased access to you in return for that. So this is something I help my students think through a lot. So if you think that you want to try to launch something on Patreon, like how are you going to break down your time management for that to both like create the things you're offering for free, whether it's a podcast or videos or something else, and then how do you have time to create all that bonus content that you offer people on your Patreon? That's where some of these issues of burnout and things come in. And so it's really about being realistic and not trying to take on too much. I always say start small and scale up, as opposed to trying to start too big and having to like cut things off along the way. Other things if you are into gaming and streaming, Twitch is a big platform. I just was talking to somebody who like crochets or knits on Twitch. That's like a thing, I guess, people doing that. It's like very slow media vibes there. Maybe something like some version of ASMR is also kind of what I was thinking about, like watching people crochet online. If you are into teaching or want to create like educational content, there are platforms like Teachable and Skillshare that let you create courses that you could put out for folks. So my student Sydney, who I mentioned earlier, was thinking about how to create some like painting classes and things that she could offer that way. Medium is a great platform. If you are a writer, you can write blog posts and articles and publish them on there. SoundCloud is great for musicians. I think it's like Billie Eilish and people like that kind of got their start on SoundCloud. So, and this is by no means an extensive list. If anybody has others that you've come across, I would love to know about them and add them to the list. And I feel like every day there's something new that's like popping up, which is a good thing. Any questions so far? All right. So just to kind of wrap up this part, similarities. A lot of these platforms, they handle the administrative work or the back end. So billing, payments. They also have some opportunity for discovery and audience development. So if you go on Substack, you'll curate a list based on what you're interested in. You can find new people. And they also let you interact with your audience and start to build community, particularly on Patreon. People do this. They, will host Zoom sessions or have a Discord server, which is another sort of online messaging tool that you can use to put where the creator interacts with their audience and where the audience interacts with each other. So Anne Helen Peterson, who I mentioned, she has a Discord for her paying subscribers where people trade podcast recommendations or talk about TV shows that we're watching or books we're reading. She has like book club type of things. Just ask like, hey, I'm moving to this new city. Anybody live there and want to meet up? Or it's just like a place for people to connect about the stuff that's happening in their lives. And so I also spent a lot of time in my class talking about how to match ideas to platforms. So thinking about like what topic you want to cover. So for example, I had a student this semester who wanted to create content for high school students about the college process, like what your guidance counselor doesn't tell you. And so we talked through, okay, do you want to make videos or a podcast or social media, an email newsletter? What do you want to do? And so we decided that for the audience she wanted to reach, YouTube was probably the best, given, Gen Z's, time they spend on YouTube, and it's easy to integrate. If you're already making a video, you could take a shorter video and put it on TikTok and sort of spread the word that way. So, think about what audience you want to reach. If you are aiming for an older audience, maybe we all know that old people love email, so maybe that's a better platform. Or if you are doing something that is very storytelling focused, it maybe lends itself to a podcast. So think about, what is the message you want to say, and what kind of community are you trying to build? Where do people that you want to reach already hang out? Maybe that will help inform your choices too. So once you have your idea, the next thing is to find an audience for it. And this is something that I don't think it's talked about enough. I think we're some ways still in this like advertising world of like, if you build it and put it out there, people will come, or this thing, just like putting it on the internet, people will come. But finding, there's a saying in the creator space, finding 1,000 true fans. So if you could do that, finding 1,000 people to pay you for your work, you can, make a full-time sort of financially secure life out of that. So to do that, I recommend starting simple. Always start with your family, your friends, your existing connections, anybody who already knows you. And if you're passionate about it, that passion will come through in what you're creating, and people will want to support you in it. And I should have mentioned earlier that, when we're going through this ideation phase in the class, I say, if you are not passionate about this topic and you're not into it, how can you expect anybody else to be and like follow you on it, So think about something that's gonna, what lights you up, right? So I had this woman, Kat Norton, who is Miss Excel on TikTok, come and speak to our class a couple weeks ago. And, she is passionate about teaching people to use Excel. That is what lights her up, and she's made videos all about it. She has millions of followers on TikTok, and now she's on, I forget if it's Teachable or Skillshare, or one of these course platforms where she's making courses people can subscribe to learn how to use Excel. But again, she started small with her family, her friends, and sort of built out from there. Searching out existing communities online. So are there places on Reddit, for example, or Discord or other social media groups where your audience already lives? So for me, in my show about democracy, I do a lot of work with the League of Women Voters, for example. I've given presentations to chapters across the country. I mentioned that the senior centers earlier. So think about where there's an audience, you might already be interested in what you have to say. And then keep an eye also on what people are talking about in those spaces and how that might align with the content that you can provide for them. If there's a question people are asking or a topic that comes up over and over and over again, that might be something worth diving into. And then, it's also tough to think about like, well, if somebody else out there is doing something similar, maybe I shouldn't do that. I hear that a lot, but most people who are interested in something follow more than one creator in that space. So I like to cook, especially during the past, during the COVID era. And so I started following lots of food bloggers. And so I follow, I don't know, probably at least a half dozen of them because it's like, I'm always interested in people's different takes on things. And so just think about like, any music you like, right? You probably follow multiple bands in the same genre. So don't limit yourself just by thinking if somebody else is already out there, you can't do that. But you should also not exactly replicate what they're doing, to find out how to bring your own uniqueness to what's already out there and how you can complement what they're doing. And that really comes into play too when it comes to things like cross promotion, which is big in the creator space. So if you have a podcast, you can put an ad for your show on someone else's show and vice versa as a way to reach new listeners. Same thing with email newsletters and video series and other things. It's like one creator promoting another, and everyone's audience grows that way. And then I also stress that subscribers don't stick around forever. There's something called churn. About 3 to 5% of subscribers drop off every month. So you always have to be cultivating and building your audience because people lose interest or their financial circumstances change and they're not able to pay, those kinds of things. So you always have to stay sort of in that growth mindset. We'll just talk briefly about monetization and then look at some examples. So this is the most important thing that I tell my class. There's one thing I hope people take. It's that to make money as a creator, you have to make content that's worth paying for. You can't just like half-ass it and expect people to pay you for it because people's money is limited and there's so many choices out there. So really investing the effort to make something that is high quality. So if you're doing a podcast, something that sounds good and is coherent and doesn't just ramble on. If you are writing something that's well edited and has a coherent narrative thread to it, this world is only going to get more creative. So it is possible to, not to build a following or to be successful without already coming in with a large audience, but you have to make content that is so good that people say, hey, you should go subscribe to this thing, or that your audience wants to share it on their own. But if you do, this world also opens up a lot of freedom in terms of making deals and licensing. I think we can all think about, podcasts that have been turned into TV shows, and that kind of thing is happening more and more all the time. So because you are the owner, you can license your work to someone else. You can strike up a partnership with a company, or do a licensing deal for a movie or a series or something along those lines. So yeah, the avenues for these types of licensing arrangements are increasing, and I think we're going to see more and more and more of this moving forward. So people typically charge less than $10 a month, I think is what I see most commonly, unless you're famous or have something really unique that you're going after. If you're targeting a really high-end audience, maybe. But you'll know if your price is too high, people will drop off or things like that. You'll be able to look at all of your analytics and figure that out. I don't want to go too much into that here, but if you have questions, happy to answer them. And then on the whole, only about 10% of people who get your content for free will pay you for it. And so that's important as you're thinking about like your overall financial picture. Like, do you need to have other sources of income besides your content business? In the beginning, the answer is probably yes, either through freelancing or some other a day job, so to speak. But what can you do to encourage contributions from people who are not already paid subscribers? Can you, and this sometimes just involves being honest about what your financial situation is. I get emails sometimes from people that I follow saying, hey, like, just so you know, like, I need this revenue to provide health insurance for my kids, or to help with a move that I'm making, or whatever it is. It requires, I think, being a little bit more vulnerable. And that's true just of this world in general, because in some ways people are subscribing to you. They have this like almost parasocial relationship with you where they feel like, or you feel like you know them, even though they've never met you, sort of thing. And so I think people maybe have expectations of how personal you'll be, or they feel like they know you. And so how do you manage that? How much are you willing to share? How vulnerable and open are you willing to be? That's something that I think a lot of creators are still, frankly, trying to work through and to navigate. And then the other revenue side outside of subscribers, yeah.
Sorry.
No,
So
Patty.
when you do make the switch from being free constantly, like personally, I figured if I'm doing a podcast, I'm gonna do it with a college, it's gonna be free, it's gonna be really low key out. But if I did keep it going, hopefully it would get a little bigger. What is it like to tell your followers, hey, now it's gonna be money? Like now it's gonna cost money?
Yeah.
I think, is that like a negative effect on your relationship with your followers? Like, how do you make that smoother?
Yeah, I mean, so in that situation, I probably would have an approach that involves still keeping part of it available for free. And I think just being honest about like what your goals are, or like, hey, I had this podcast when I was a student, and the college was paying for it, but now I'm graduating and I really like it. And I like the community that we built here. I want to keep it going, but I need your help to do it. Sort of framing it that way. And so I'm going to keep, 2 episodes a month for free, but I'm going to move everything else to be subscriber only. If you want to hear, the other 2 or 3 episodes a month, you have to subscribe to get them, or something along those lines. So you're not completely losing people, but hopefully you would start to bring people in along the way.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then the other way to make money is through digital advertising. This is done in cost per 1,000 impressions. So in the podcast world, if you are approaching an advertiser and you say, you get 20,000 downloads of your show per episode, you would get. Sorry, let me start that over. This is where math is not my strong suit. So this is probably the most difficult thing to explain. So every industry has a CPM rate. In podcasting, it is, let's just say $25 per 1,000 downloads for a 60-second ad. And this is probably at the lower end of the spectrum. I've charged more because we reach like a niche academic audience, but just for the purposes of explanation, let's say you charge $25 CPM and your show gets 10,000 downloads per episode, you would get $250 for every ad that you run, every 60-second ad. So that's, you're not going to become a millionaire off of that. But it's something, right? And so that if you have the advertising in combination with paid subscribers or Patreon or something like that, you could cobble together a decent chunk of income. But you need a big audience to make these things worthwhile. If you have, a very small audience, it's really hard to make this math work for you unless you have, I would say, at least 10,000 subscribers, followers, downloads, whatever the metric is in that particular area. So this is like the not so great part of this creator world. This is like the holdover of like the previous media world where everything was all about like, online advertising and things. So my hope is that we will move more toward the community subscriber model as opposed to relying on advertising at, frankly, pretty low rates. But again, like I was saying with Kinsey Grant and thinking is cool, if you have a niche product you can offer, people will pay higher rates. There's also exclusive sponsorships or sponsored content, all other different avenues you can go down. And I don't want to get too deep into that here, but we do talk about it in my class. And then being in this creator space, having a podcast or a newsletter or being on YouTube leads to other opportunities, consulting or speaking or teaching, class development type of thing. It really just putting yourself out there as somebody who knows a lot about a particular topic really lets you share that knowledge, not just with your subscribers or your listeners or your audience, but with other people and other groups who might be interested in hearing about it. I know my podcast has led to lots of speaking gigs of all sorts, and I pitched freelance articles based on it. So this kind of thing works if you seek it out. So I just want to end by looking at a couple of examples here. Let me skip to the end here. So this is one that I really like. It's a group called Multitude, run by a woman named Amanda McLaughlin. And I'll show this because she also has a lot of resources. So Multitude is a podcast collective. So they have a bunch of shows that sort of speak to broadly the LGBTQ experience in a lot of ways. So movies or sports, or there's one about like fantasy, like literature types of things. They have this show called Horse. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see this. Okay. So let me start that again. Multitude is a podcast collective that my friend Amanda McLaughlin founded. They bring together a lot of independent podcasters who create content broadly focused on the LGBTQ community, and allow the shows to share audience and do larger advertising deals. So rather than people from the Queer Movie Podcast and The Newest Olympian courting advertisers and subscribers on their own, Multitude does that on behalf of all the shows in the network. So the numbers are a bit larger. People who like one show that they do might like another. So there's lots of audience sharing that way. But I share this also because they have so many free resources about starting a podcast. So it's definitely look at multitude.productions about starting a show, running a show, making money. They even have a free podcast starter kit that you can get. Actually, it's not free, it costs $35, but lots of good information in there. So definitely check that out for all things podcasting. One other example I'll share from the world of podcasting. So this is a woman named Erica Mandy who runs a site called The Newsworthy. So Erica used to be a TV news journalist in Los Angeles and sort of got tired of the daily news grind, like waking up at 4 a.m. to do a newscast, all that kind of stuff. So she started a 10-minute daily news podcast. And she's specifically targeting millennial women who they're not news junkies, right? They just want to know what's going on. Fast, fair, and fun is her tagline. We could probably have a whole other conversation from like a media studies perspective about like the efficacy of that, but we'll let that aside for now. But she has built her own company. She now has a team that she works with. And so she's been so successful that she's been able to hire people to work with her. And so she built this all through a podcast that has now expanded into a newsletter. So these are just a couple of examples of people who are making this work. If you have an idea and no one else is doing it and you think there's an audience, you can totally make it work for yourself. So the last thing I will share is that for anybody who wants to learn more about this, you can take my class, COM 297. It's a 1-credit seminar that's offered Friday mornings from 9:05 to 10:20. In the fall, it will be in the business building. So I bring in lots of guest speakers who are out doing this work. And the final project in the class is to create a proof of concept for a creative endeavor that you could launch, a podcast, a newsletter. So you don't actually launch the thing. We don't have time to do that in one semester. But you should hopefully be able to have all the tools in place, put all the work in to be able to launch it on your own, if you so choose. So that's everything that I had. Here's my info, how to get in touch with me. Happy to answer questions or help you even outside of the class. I know not everybody can take the class, so happy to help you on your creative journeys any way that I can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will say that course actually works perfect with the startup week theme that we have going on this week in the college. We just had the arts business ideas competition, and it's like $5,000 to first place, and then smaller prizes to the others. But I just saw 3 interesting presentations, but I was like, what if we had so many more students doing this, or what if there are ways to kind of be further along when you present, because a lot of the questions that they weren't able to answer was because they hadn't taken a course like that. So that sounds really amazing, and I'm totally going to plug it to all of my students.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Totally take it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm looking.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, okay, in regards to branding, you have to, I assume, like, you're marketing yourself, you have to have consistency over your platforms and your website and such, but picking like the genre that you want to do and knowing the community that you're talking about, what is it like to actually choose this is what we're about, this is our brand, this is what we do, this is our mission statement? Like, can you talk about being so centered on one thing? Like, I don't know how to explain that, but
yeah, so I mean, it's hard. It does feel kind of permanent, right? Like you can't go back once you say. But I do think that audiences will come along with you. I don't think anybody expects anyone to be the same all the time forever and ever, right? As long as you're honest about what you're doing. I think it's just really taking the time in the beginning to think through, what is it that I want to say and who do I want to speak to, and being super clear and laser focused on that, at least to start, knowing you can, expand down the line. But there's really no other way to stand out. So I have this conversation a lot with my students, because they'll say, I want to make a podcast about football. Okay, well, there's like a gajillion podcasts about football. So do you want to do something on college football, professional football, what team, specific players, specific positions on the team, specific aspects of the game? Like, you really need to draw down what you're doing. And so thinking that through will go a long way to helping you build your brand, and just thinking about what parts of that question are you the most excited about? That will help you figure out where to gravitate toward. And then there was something else about that I was going to say. Oh, and that I think is difficult, especially for creative types, because we just want to do stuff and put it out there, right? So taking that time to step back, and actually Kat, who is Miss Excel, talked about this. So she made a couple of videos, and they sort of had more success than she thought. And so she's like, okay, I need to really take a step back here and figure out there is something here, right? So she took I think it was 2 or 3 weeks off of making her videos, and just plans, okay, here's what my series of content's going to be. This is how I'm going to produce it. This is what I'm going to do in each one. And so just being really mindful about that planning process, I think goes a long way. But there is no everybody follows the same path. It is a little bit different. But I think the more mindful you can be, the more confident you'll be in the brand that you're making.
I don't know if you mentioned, thanks for the very interesting presentation. I'm sorry for
That's okay.
but I was wondering if you have some advice in terms of the length of the podcast itself. I know it's connected with the content, but there might be suggestions in terms of how much people are able to absorb
Mhm.
or connect with. Because I'm interested in one that could be more of a hybrid, like academic, but also connected with everyday life, but bringing the academic language down takes a little time.
This is Beatrice, she's a postdoc for the Netherlands Foundation Sawyer Seminar. So
I know the Sawyer Seminar. Yeah.
Oh,
I work in the McCourtney Institute in liberal arts. So I think we definitely promoted the Sawyer Seminar and those kind of things. So that's great. As far as length, I mean, so this is, every podcast hosting platforms, when you make a podcast, you have to work with a third-party company to put it out onto iTunes and Spotify and all the platforms. They give you analytics about how long people are listening to you. And there is definitely a drop off. I know for our show, it's usually maybe about 60% of the audience sticks through for the whole episode. The rest sort of drop off at points along the way. So some people will say that means you have to make things short, and the shorter the better, but I'm not necessarily convinced of that. I think that that 30%, maybe they would drop off regardless of if the episode was 30 minutes or 60 minutes. If people are going to drop off, they're going to drop off. So I think that you should take as much time as you need to get your point across, clearly, but no more than that. Like the minute when you start to get into like rambling or that kind of thing, that's a good indicator of when to cut things down.
But connected with that, because if we sit down and plan, because it's a combination of some people have more to say than others. But then if you're planning a series, then you need to be consistent in terms of the length of each one, and some will be richer than others. So trying to keep that balance.
Yeah, I mean, you can do some of that through editing. If you have someone who is, really long-winded, you can edit them down. And as long as you're upfront about, hey, this might be edited, and most people I think sort of realize that. And I think I've had people say to me that we make them sound better because you cut out everybody. No one speaks perfectly all the time, right? Like I could have benefited from an editor on this presentation I just gave you, right? So there's, everybody benefits from a good editor. So I don't think people are like precious about it that way. But if you just want like a good general framework for starting out, I think 30 minutes is a good framework that people can sort of get their minds around that, because we're familiar with like TV episodes or other things that are 30 minutes in length. At least try for that and see, and you might get to it and find that, oh, no way, like what we want to say, we really need 60. And that's as long as you're deliberate about it and that like there is informational value in all 60 of those minutes, I think that's fine. But if you start to get into, people are way off on a tangent, which never happens with academics, right? They never do that. Then you maybe think about, okay, we need to figure out how to condense this. And I think asking for feedback is very important too, especially with a new project. Like make a pilot episode and send it around to your colleagues, your family, whoever you think would want to listen to it and give you honest feedback. It's better to get that up front before you publish than get it in like a 1-star Apple Podcast review after the fact. So definitely seek out feedback and ask direct questions like, is this too long? Would you have listened to the whole thing if I didn't ask you to? Those kind of things will help you gauge.
My work is with human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So as a human being, and you're a human being who is also a teacher, and you're a human being who is a teacher who is teaching a 297 course with humans who want to create. What is I call this the rollback, how far back into the process? You have your end game of the podcast. Where do you start?
Yeah. So I start with the notion of curiosity. That's what guides me, has always guided me as a journalist. What are you curious about? That is going to lead to what you want to create content around. And if that curiosity is not there, there's not going to be that spark that drives you to do something consistently, or to at least even just to go through all the planning, right? I could tell if people have an idea, they sort of, even by the time it gets to the end of the class, people start to lose interest, and I'm like, okay, maybe you need to go back to the drawing board. But curiosity is hard to teach. I would love any suggestions you have. I feel like I still don't, it's just, because it's not something that we practice a lot as humans, or, most people don't, especially, I think, because of this world where it's just such a sea of content. You could just sit back and watch and not really think critically about what you're doing. And so shifting that mindset from passive consumer to curious consumer to curious enough to become a creator about something, I think that's where you have to start.
Do you have conversations, or is it useful to have conversations about belief and intention and this kind of purposeful, you say mindful, and I understand that, in your particular classroom, which is absolutely useful for creating change makers in the world. Can you talk a little bit about how you help someone not just find curiosity, but actually mold that into an intention?
Yeah, I mean, so we sort of break it down into little chunks over the course of the semester. And so we start with, I have, just to kind of get the juices flowing, I usually have the class go out and do some type of observational exercise the first week or two. Okay, let your phone here, go out and watch someone and take notes about what they're doing. There's a book called The Art of Noticing by Rob Walker that I use a lot. It has little sort of exercises to help spark curiosity. And one of them that I use most often, it's called create someone's story for them. So go to the library, go to the hub, just sit and observe someone and write out what they're thinking, what's going on behind whatever they're doing. Are they nervous about an exam they have coming up? If so, what's the exam? What do you think their major is? Or, if you're observing two people have a conversation, what does that conversation tell you about who those people are, what their relationship is to one another? And so just getting people to look at each other in different ways is often really eye-opening. There's another exercise that I use, which is creating a shared group, like a shared story type of thing. So I ask people about, we've used your first day of kindergarten last time. And so we built this story about everybody's first day of kindergarten, and hearing one person say something, someone else say, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And, it sort of gets people going. And so that is not at all related to content creation or coming up with ideas for a podcast or something, but just sort of breaks people out of that, okay, I'm in my just straight ahead, going from thing A to thing B, and normal routines people have. So that's one tactic I've used, and that leads well into brainstorming about, okay, what do you actually want to talk about? What ideas are you have? What are you curious about? It just gets people more in that creative mindset, especially at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, which is albeit not the best time to try to do creative work. Yeah.
So I'm a journalism major right now, and in regards to getting people to agree to talk to you for a podcast, I know that when I try to get people to talk to me for papers, it's not as easy.
I talk Com 260, I know. Yeah.
So it's not, you get told no a lot. So talking to people about genuine interest about getting them onto your podcast, can you talk about that, that interaction?
I mean, I think it's different because podcasts are a little bit more they have more stake in it, right? So people who are on a podcast, they they have an agenda too, for lack of a better term. So they want to talk about something they want to promote. This is why there's like a whole book, podcast, feedback loop of people going on podcasts to promote their books. It's a natural way to frame a conversation and give people a chance to explain who they are and what they're doing. I think so it's a little bit, and you're also making more of an investment in them. It's not just like, hey, can I talk to you for 2 minutes to get like 2 quotes from my story? Like you are bringing them along and making them part of what you're doing. And I think it's also like something that they can share. Like we were talking about the State Theater before. So if you went down there and said, hey, I'm writing a story, can I, talk to you? I'm sure they would. But if you say, hey, I want to talk to you, I want to interview you on my podcast where we're going to talk for 30 minutes about all the things that the theater does and your background. And people also love to talk about themselves. That's another big thing. So, that's something that not only are they going to do it, but they're probably going to share that too, because people who already follow the State Theater might be interested to say, oh, here's this person who's the new director, like here's his backstory, things you might not know. And it's told through your lens. So it adds more authenticity, more credibility. It's not the State Theater saying it. You bring your perspective as a journalist to it. You ask questions that he might not have thought of or things that he might not have shared otherwise. So I think that's a big factor, like a big win in your column or a big feather in your cap when it comes to reaching out to people. And I'm always surprised. Like, I think we often negotiate with ourselves and say, oh no, this person will never do it. They never. And, the worst that happens is someone never responds to you, or they say, hey, no, thanks, I'm too busy. Like most people are very polite. They're not going to say, no, you're terrible. Like, why would you ever think about reaching out to me about this? That our own fear of rejection is much greater than the actual rejection, I think.
Going off that, when people are more willing to talk in your podcast, I'm sure it's still a little, if they're not used to talking, it might be a little uncomfortable for them. How do you make it more comfortable, make it more of a conversation than just like, this is what we have to do?
Mm-hmm. So sometimes a pre-interview can help with that, just like a 15-minute phone call of, hey, tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do. And that also helps give them, and I tell them some of the things I want to cover in the interview. And that gives them something to think about. I try not to give away too much because I don't want people to come in with like 6 pages of notes that they're going to read, So that is one tactic. Also, just like, we always have to check sound levels and things at the beginning. So I just ask people like, how's your day going so far? Do you have pets? Do you have kids? Do you have, things that just sort of get people talking about things other than like what we're going to dive into, I think helps loosen people up sometimes. Also reiterating that it's not live. So this is not like they're live on the radio, like we're going to be edited after the fact. That's also reassuring for people too. And just saying, if you need to pause and like take a minute to think about something, that's fine. Like just, you do you, and whatever, whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. I'll sometimes say like when we were recording in person, which doesn't happen as much these days, but like, think about like if you and I were having this conversation over a glass of wine or a beer or something, like just to sort of think about it, try to pretend as much as you can that like these microphones and everything are not here right now.
What do you use for editing your podcast? What technical?
Audition, which is what you used in your TLT session, right?
Yeah, I use Audition and I use Premiere for the video. Podcast.
Oh, right.
So a little bit of both.
It's interesting being my age because I'm 64. So I have watched what you're challenging me to imagine is that a consumer culture may be making a shift into a creator culture, but that's also consumer based.
Yes.
So it's a very interesting thought process for me. And with friends like Stephanie, my understanding of technology and with a room like this has vastly increased over the course of the last several years. And yet, we are still trying to achieve things as creators, because I'm a playwright as a creator. And what you sound like to me is a playwriting teacher. You really just sound like a playwriting teacher, because I'm just drawing, I'm drawing boxes around what you and I have in common, which is basically storytelling, that you have a story to tell as a journalist or a podcaster or a musician or a graduate assistant trying to tell the story of we all have to, and sometimes winnowing it down to its simplest, and this is what I hear you asking, in its simplest form, is a podcast a story? That to me makes me feel very calm. And that's the human aspect to me.
It's just a different way to present a story. And that's, I think when I talk about matching media to message, it's really said another way. What's the best way to present this story? Is it in a written form? Because of the nature of this world, we have to sort of choose in some respects, right? Are we going to present this, through audio or through video or through the written word? And that's been around forever. I mean, the technology changes, but we've always had, at least in the, I guess, modern-ish era, like different ways of consuming things and having to make some of those choices. But yes, very much all about the story. I don't think that that'll ever change. I mean, even, unless we all move to the metaverse, maybe it'll be different in there. But as long as we are here in this world, I think stories will continue to rule the day.
Telepathic storytelling.
Yeah.
Jenna, thank you so much.
Oh,
for
sure.
this. And I know we're bad at time, but if you have a few minutes, maybe you can
Oh,
sign
yeah,
some
of course.
autographs and do some stuff like that.
Of course.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us.